great question. It was a real pleasure to get the invitation. I love talking about my work and meeting other people who are interested in similar things. And I'm especially interested in music projects that involve youth getting involved with music. So it sounded like a great chance to talk a bit more about what I do and meet some interesting people.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the music you compose and maybe give us a bit of a sample?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a composer. I've been composing for about, I guess, close to 30 years now. And I like to write for a variety of ensembles, orchestras, chamber ensembles, choirs, and things like that. And there's a number of things I'm interested in my music. Sometimes it's just a musical idea, but often there's an idea outside of music also that sort of influences how I write. I'm quite interested in folklore, so that appears in a number of my pieces. But I think the thing you would find appearing most often in my pieces is an influence from sounds from the natural world, sometimes sounds like water or wind or just various things in the soundscape, but especially I'm interested in animal songs, seals, birds, whales, and so on. And I was thinking, if you'd like a little example of what I do, I could play just a short example of a bird song, and then how I listen to the bird song, and then a piece based on that bird song. So what I'll play for you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, great. I'll play the beginning of a wind quintet that I wrote in 2018 called Woodwings. The first movement is based on the song of the bobolink, which is a bird that lives across North America. I'm from Canada originally, so probably unless you've traveled in North America, you won't have heard one. But I'll play a little example of the song. And then often with bird songs, you really have to slow them down so you can hear the intricacy of what's happening inside them, because birds process sound much faster than we do. So when they sing something, they're hearing a whole lot of very complicated details inside. But when we hear it, we just hear like a little chirp or, a rumble or, chattering or something like that. But then if we slow it down, we can hear the intricacy of what's happening. So I'll play the bird song, then the slowed down bird song, and then my piece based on the bird song. So I'll just share my screen here. So here's the bobolink song. Right, so I think it's quite hard, it's we can hear a fast bubbling song, but it's hard to tell exactly what's going on with it. So here's that same song slowed down. I think it's maybe a quarter speed. So that's just a little example of it. Birds actually can sing on both sides of their syrinx at once. So if it sounds like it's singing two notes at once, it is singing two notes at once. And sometimes the two notes can even imply a third tone. So it can sound like it's singing triads or other sort of groups of two or three notes. But of course, putting them together in quite a different way than a human musician probably would think of. So that's what I find really interesting about it. So in this piece, I started by transcribing what the bird was singing and then sort of developing it. I wasn't trying to imitate the bird exactly, but I also wasn't trying to do what I would do on my own. So trying to write some sort of hybrid of how the bird sings the song and how I hear it. So here's the piece. I'll just play a few minutes of it. I'll stop right there, but I can play more later if there's time.
So where did you get the idea of combining music and nature?
That's a great question. I think coming from Canada, which is a country that has, quite a lot of natural spaces, I think Canadians tend to think of sort of nature and wildness as part of the Canadian identity. So I think maybe more than in some other countries, there is already quite a lot of Canadian music that somehow, it often depicts the landscape or just the experience of being in nature. Um, and there's a Canadian composer named Murray Schafer who was quite influential on me when I was younger, and he's done a number of things like music workshops outside or music that's meant to take place outdoors. So from the time I was in high school, I was aware of the idea of making music that's not just like bringing a Beethoven symphony outside, but actually creating music that is meant to perform in an outdoor environment. And then my interest in birdsong happened, I guess, 1997. I moved to Amsterdam to study. And shortly after I moved there, I heard an amazing bird singing outside my window one night. It was still dark and it was raining. And I threw up in the window and listened to this bird. I had never heard anything like it before. And it was just this beautiful sound. And I was really interested in how like short pieces of what it's saying sounded a lot like human music. But if you put it all together, it didn't sound like how humans would structure a piece of music. And so the next day I told everybody about the bird I had heard, and it turned out it was a European blackbird, which of course is actually quite common, I think, all over Europe, but I had never heard it because I had just moved there. So I wrote a piece called Night Blackbird Song. I think I wrote the piece, shortly after that in 1998. And for that piece, I transcribed a blackbird, all the little motifs that it sang. And in the piece, I sort of arranged them first the way I thought the blackbird would, and then the way I thought a human would. And I sort of explored the differences in how I thought the blackbird structured a song and how I thought, a human musician would be more likely to structure it. And at the time I thought, okay, this is going to be my bird song piece, and then I will move on to thinking about something else. But it actually made me more curious about birds and how birds structure their songs. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of reading about animal cognition. And I learned that actually lots of animals have cultural behavior. For example, I was reading about gorillas and chimpanzees using sign language and being able to learn the symbols and then being able to combine them in new ways. And I was also really interested to learn, about birds having different dialects in different places. So the birds that we call songbirds, or scientifically they're called oscine passerines, learn their songs just the way we learn music from people around us. So I was really interested in the idea of bird song as a cultural activity and not just some instinctive thing that each bird is, born doing the same, but not only does each species have a different type of song, which is, structured differently and learned differently and uses different elements within it, but within a species, each bird will have a different version of the song as well. So I became quite interested in that. And so it's 23 years later, and I'm still thinking about bird songs. And I imagine I'll be thinking about them for the next 23 years as well.
Can you tell us briefly about your process of composing?
Yeah, that's great. And I think, I've been realizing recently that one of the reasons I do like composing with birdsong, and again, it's not the only thing I do, but I really like the process. And I think first I'll start just describing how I write. I guess there's maybe 3 different ways I typically go about composing something. If it's an instrumental piece and it's not based on any extra musical idea, then I usually just improvise at the piano, or maybe I hear a sound around me, but it's not like a specifically musical sound, but it makes me think about something. Like I have a whole set of piano pieces that was just inspired by hearing a singer practicing the interval of a major 10th, an octave and a third. And then I wrote a whole set of pieces based around different intervals. Or I often just, improvise at the piano or at the oboe. Sometimes I used to be an oboist, and see what ideas come from that. So that's one process I use. Then often if I'm writing a piece based on either a text, on poetry, or based on some kind of folklore or some other kind of story, then I think more about the images I'm trying to convey, and if there's words to it, then how I want to present those words. And then if I'm writing a piece based on animal songs, and again, every piece is different, but one of the things I really like is just the process of thinking about say if it's based on bird song, like what birds do I want to include in this? Often I think that I want to, portray a particular area. So for example, the piece I just played for you was a commission from a Canadian wind quintet. It was actually going to be played by 5 different wind quintets across Canada, and all the commissions were somehow supposed to represent Canada. So I thought for this piece, I would write a piece based on birds that are found in Canada. And I actually found a list of all the birds that live in Canada or that are, regularly found in Canada. It was like 400 and something. And I made a spreadsheet and I literally listened to every single bird song and figured out what ones I wanted to use in the piece. And I sort of ranked them on a scale of 1 to 5. And I absolutely don't mean like this bird is better than that one, but I just rank them on like how much I think this is the bird I want to use for this piece. So I rank them sort of on how they fit in with the idea that I'm having for the piece. And then after I've listened to all 450 birds, then I found the ones that I really wanted to explore in that piece. And I sort of keep notes on them. So if I'm writing another piece later, maybe I'll go back and explore the song of a bird that I haven't explored previously. So, sometimes I do it that way. And I enjoy having that creative process where it starts with listening. And then when I figure out what species I'm really interested in exploring, then I'll listen to many recordings of that species and figure out which individual song I want to explore a little bit further. So that's one way I do it sometimes. Right now I'm writing a couple of pieces that are, lockdown commissions. And so for this, I'm transcribing the birds that are actually coming to my garden, which is really, I've actually found it a really helpful process during lockdown because it makes me feel a little bit happier not to be able to go far from home, because I have started recognizing the individual birds that come and go, and it actually sort of gives more variety to my life during a time which could seem a little bit limited.
What instruments do you play yourself?
Oh, great. So oboe is what I trained on. I entered university planning to be an oboist, but then halfway through I decided I wanted to be a composer. I don't play oboe much these days. I would like to get back to it a bit at some point. I sort of played, after I finished university, I played oboe in a klezmer band for a while, and then I guess got busy with other things. But I just bought some very nice reeds. I'm never going to make reeds again. I make reeds, but that part of my life is definitely over. But I bought some nice reeds and I do think I might play again. But on a regular basis, I play piano when I'm composing, and I also play fiddle for fun. I'm not a good fiddle player. I started when I was 30, and I've never had time to practice fiddle much. So I'm very much an amateur on the fiddle, but I love it. And I actually think it's really important also to engage with music at lots of different levels. Even if you're a professional in one aspect of music, it's really fun to be a beginner at some other aspect.
So why did you decide to go into composing rather than performing?
When I was in high school, I didn't really know much about composing. I mean, I'm going to say it probably didn't help much that the composers that we played were mostly dead and mostly men and mostly from Europe. So it didn't really seem like it just never occurred to me that I could be a composer when I was in high school. I entered university as an oboist. The way my university was structured in Canada, everybody entered as a performer, and then if you wanted to be a composer, you would switch after second year. So it wasn't a disadvantage that I had entered as a performer. And then I went to a music camp that summer, Sewanee Summer Music Center. So it was the summer I was 18, and there were composition classes, and I decided, why not? So I signed up for that, and something just sort of clicked and fell into place, because I had always known that I wanted to be a musician, but I never really loved performing. I love some parts about performing, but it made me very nervous, and it just seemed like it. Some people just feel like they're born to perform, and they feel like they're at home on stage, and I never felt that, even though I'm very glad for all the experiences I've had performing and all the ensembles I've been part of. And I also never loved practicing. And again, I wanted to be a better oboist and a better musician, so I did practice. But I think if you want to be a performer, probably it's better if you either really love practicing or you really love performing. But I knew I wanted to be a musician, so I had stuck with that. And then when I started composing, something just clicked and I knew that's what I wanted to do. That was what I was really drawn to spending hours a day doing. And that was, when I wrote pieces, that was when I sort of had my greatest satisfaction and my greatest sense of having done something. And by that, I don't mean to say that composition is easy at all. So when I say I love it, it's not that it's always, I don't always have a good day when I compose, but I feel like it's the work I need to be doing. But I will say, in case any of you out there are, interested in composing or thinking about it, so the first piece I wrote when I was 18 at that summer camp, it was really easy to write and it was fun and I had a great time. And I thought, composition is fun and easy, I'm going to do this. And then when I went back to university in the fall and started composing, it wasn't as fun and easy. And I completely panicked and I didn't compose anything for a year because I thought something was horribly wrong. That it's actually very normal to have good days and good months and bad months and good years and bad years. But it took me a while, because my first experience had just been so straightforward and simple. It took me a while to achieve more of a sense of balance. And I guess realize you do have to work at it the same way you do it, practicing or anything else, any other skills you want to develop.
So you're very interested in musicology. Can you explain what that is?
In zoomusicology, you said?
Zoomusicology.
Yeah, sorry, you cut out for a second. Yeah, so zoomusicology is a word that many people, though I would say not all people use. There's some other words that you might hear like biomusicology or ecomusicology, but broadly speaking, when people say they're studying zoomusicology, it means they're interested sort of in the aesthetic aspects of sounds made by animals. So in a sense, it's like studying animal songs as if they were music. And now I know, a question many people at this point ask is, well, are animal songs music? And I wrote my doctoral dissertation looking at the question of whether animal songs are music. And when I started writing it, I sort of thought, well, I'll just figure out what music is, and then I'll figure out whether animals do it. But of course, anybody who's spent time trying to define music will find that it's a really slippery definition, and it's really hard to come up with one definition that encompasses everything that humans think of as music and leaves everything else out. There's sort of no way to define it that includes everything that is widely considered to be music. And I think, the same goes for animal songs. Like there's no way to define human music that would encompass most human music, but would leave all animal songs out. For example, many animal songs are culturally determined. The animals have to learn them from other members of their species. There's sort of, a way people often talk about human music and other art is sort of balancing pattern and surprise. So music becomes interesting if there's enough predictable that you sort of have an expectation of what will come next, but there's enough that's surprising or that changes that you don't always know exactly what will come next. Like you tend to tune out if something's too predictable, like a metronome, or if it's not predictable at all, like some random noises. And that's actually sort of something that animals balance as well. So there's a lot of ways that human music and animal songs overlap. So at this point, I no longer really, I can't really give an answer to whether animal songs are music or not, because it depends so much on how you personally want to define music. And for some people, it's very important in their definition that it's made by a human. So, that's how they want to define it. For me, the fact that it's sort of somehow culturally determined is an important aspect of it. So although there's some animals that sing very beautiful songs, like say gibbons, gibbons learn, they don't learn their songs, they're instinctive. So they're born already, knowing how to sing the song they will sing. So for me, that's not as interesting musically as the song of an animal that learns from other members of its species or from other species around them sometimes. So yeah, I would say broadly speaking, probably many different zoomusicologists define what they do a little bit differently, but it's generally looking at the music-like aspects of animal songs. And one thing I would say, like I've done a number of collaborative projects, often collaborating with biologists, but looking at animal songs from a sort of music theoretical point of view. And I think certainly whether you want to call animal songs music or not, they're close enough to human music that you can use from tools from music theoretical analysis to understand animal songs better.
It says on your website that you're interested in music being used as a vehicle for social change. What do you mean by that?
Oh, that's a good question too. One way, You know, my music doesn't tend to be explicitly environmental. Like I don't usually, you know, say this piece is about climate change or, you know, about pollution or something like that. But I often hope that people listening to my music, especially if the, you know, say the piece is based on a bird song, um, I hope that they might become more interested in that bird, more interested in learning about different species, maybe more interested in learning the degree to which each bird or animal singing is acting as an individual. Often I think people think, oh, there's a bunch of birds out there, but they don't really differentiate between them, or maybe they think there's a bunch of crows out there, but they're not thinking about the individuality of each crow, and that each crow wants to express something and is, you know, has plans for what it's doing or whatever. And so I do hope that in my music, you know, people might sometimes gain a different perspective on the world around them, and hopefully on the importance of preserving, you know, space for all species to live healthfully and, you know, do the things they need to do in their lives. I would also say I'm also really interested in music being accessible to anybody, not just to, you know, professional musicians. And I think I do feel like this has actually improved over my lifetime a little bit, but I feel like maybe at the time I was studying, there was often quite a, I don't know, not a very friendly attitude towards amateurs or towards listeners. And there was a sense that, you know, professional musicians are the only people who really count. And I've never felt that that was true. And so I've, you know, in a number of different ways, I've tried to write pieces, you know, some of my pieces that are performable by anybody. You know, I really enjoy working with children and adults at all levels and so on. So I think those are two things. I guess another, you know, I went through a period of really disliking things like orchestras, which felt very hierarchical to me. There's like a conductor telling everybody what to do. And you know, at one point I had thought about being an orchestral oboist, and I certainly had some wonderful experiences playing in orchestras. So I, you know, I don't regret that at all. But there was also, I remember a very specific time with, you know, a very good conductor, but I was just like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life sitting here being told what to play when. And so I went through maybe a 10-year period where I just felt really negative towards that kind of very organized musical activity. I actually enjoy that kind of thing much more now, maybe because of realizing both that it can be done in a more egalitarian sort of way, even if the conductor is, you know, up there organizing things, if the conductor has a feeling of just being one of the musicians and facilitating the performance along with everybody else, then I like that kind of atmosphere much better. So I you know, I think more recently I've come to appreciate the whole range of musical activities again, from, you know, completely free improvisation to very organized things. But I do really enjoy writing pieces where the performers have a lot of say in how the piece is structured as well. So I've written a number of pieces where, for example, I mean, they often tend to be birdsong based pieces, I think, because birdsong also comes back in some ways that are quite predictable, but are also different each time. So often maybe transcribing the birdsong, but then giving the performers quite a lot of freedom in when they play it and how they play it and maybe which songs they play and things like that. So I like experiences that are more collaborative as well.
Would you like to end by playing another of your pieces and maybe giving a bit of background about it?
Okay, great. So I'll play another piece that's also based on a bird song. It's from the same wind quintet. And this piece is based on a hermit thrush song. It's another Canadian, well, North American bird that I wrote in this piece that's based on Canadian birds. And it's quite common across North America, but it's very reclusive. So you tend to only hear it if you actually go out, you know, in the wilderness and are quiet. And it is, you know, it sings in the morning and the evening like most birds do, but it's also quite notable for sometimes singing in the middle of the afternoon when no other birds are singing. So it's a real treat, like if you're out in the woods, to hear it. And a number of years ago, I did a collaborative project with some biologists studying hermit thrush song from both a musical and a scientific perspective. And we found that its song is actually based on the overtone series. So I will play again a hermit thrush song, and then a hermit thrush song slowed down, and then the piece, and just tell me when my time is up and I'll cut it off. Thank you. So here's a hermit thrush. So now I'll play a slowed down version of that song so you can hear the overtones in it. And now I will play the piece.
And that's time for today.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me here.